The wretched man refuses to be conquered. He is bold, he is brutal, and he is belligerent. On his path to pleasure and passion, the power of God interrupts him and transforms the wretched into the wrecked. Join us on our transforming journey.
What is up, Rep Nation? We are glad to be back with you today. We've got an awesome episode in store for you. I'm stoked to be here with Matt. We are sitting not 500 miles away, but about 2 feet apart now. So we're doing a little bit of changing with how we're co-hosting, making it a little bit more fun. Been outnumbered today. I've got two bald dudes sitting here with my partially balding self. Going to sit in here and talk, throwing some shade their way. So while I sit here and take a gullible sip of my coffee, I'm going to hand this over to Matt and let him get us into today's episode.
Yeah, well, the pull of the force is big, strong with this one, so you just need to go ahead and shave it off.
Well, I noticed it when I was in Colorado, and we had some pictures taken when I was doing the Stay Forth stuff, and I got the pictures back, and I was like, I have a bald strip on the top of my head, and I came back and told my wife, it's got to go.
Right. That's what I said just before this. I told my wife, it's either bald or Bosley. Like, there's only two options for guys, right? That's it. Anyway, let's get into this, because we'll go all day like this, especially with our guest. So our guest is Bryan Catherman. Now, Bryan and I go way back. I was trying to figure it out just like you. I was on his podcast, the Salty Unbeliever, right?
Salty Believer Unscripted.
Salty Believer Unscripted. See? Like, you know how you guys were messing up Oak Hills and Oak Halls, right? So we'll mess that all up, but we'll be all right.
I'm glad we can return the favor.
There you go. So Bryan is a good friend through technology for years. We met each other when we were in seminary together, and so neither one of us can really peg the date, but it's probably close to a decade. It's got to be around there at least. So I was just thinking of him recently too, because he used to be a military chaplain, and when they had all the furlough, that was one of the things that got him into a passion that's probably connected us, and it's because of church planting. But he's awesome in discipleship, and he may not say the word awesome, but he's just a guy who loves disciple making. He loves being with and around people talking about Jesus, and that's one of the things that we press on this podcast. And so not only that, he is a church planter, and where he is in his context is out in Utah. So we think this is going to be just a great opportunity for him to share with all of our listeners here. So with all that said, Bryan, welcome to Wretched and Wrecked.
Man, I'm glad to be here. I just need to correct just a couple things. One, more of a formality. I never served as a military chaplain. I was a contractor for the chaplain corps, which is where, the military guys, usually when the government would shut down, they would usually be okay. They might get paid later or whatever. When you're a contractor and the government shuts down, they just say adios. The other thing I need to correct is I think you were talking about balding, and I'm technically not bald, but I just can't get the hair on the top to really grow. So I'm splitting hairs here on this one, right?
Literally, no pun intended.
Right. Well, the other thing too, I'll tell you, it's funny. Totally off the topic. I hope your listeners are okay with that. But my brother-in-law, his kids, when they were a little bit younger, they really liked their dad, and they went into to get their hair cut, and they're like, "Hey, can we have that W like Dad has? Like that W in your, can we get that?"
The W.
So I kind of have some of that going on too. If I let this grow, there's a big W up there, right?
Yeah, when your forehead keeps getting bigger, man, you're tapping out. That's just wrong. Like, you gotta do something, right?
Yeah.
So tell our audience who doesn't know you, doesn't know much about you, tell them about how you came to faith and to know Christ as Savior.
Well, so my story goes maybe like many others. I live in the West. I've always lived in the West. The church is not as prevalent in the West yet. By God's grace, my mom still called me to church about, I don't know, maybe 5-6 times a year, and she was probably not a believer. I was definitely not a believer, but I had kind of some context of Christianity. And then there's a lot of Mormonism in Idaho and in Utah and Wyoming, Arizona, this general area, because it's just all kind of around in the West. And so I knew I didn't want to have anything to do with that. And then I kind of associated all religion with Mormonism, and so I pushed away, but at least a little context of Christianity reminded me that there was something different. So my wife and I get married. She's kind of made an exodus out of the Mormon church, and I was just a pagan to the core. And a couple years into our marriage, before 9/11 and all that, I was in the military, and a couple years into our marriage, we just started feeling the pull to, hey, we should probably do something with church. And she wanted to, maybe consider going back to the Mormon church. I said, no way. I don't want anything to do with that. So we're kind of dabbling in Christian church life. We went for 2 years at a faithful gospel preaching church for 2 years, literally. And I'm like, man, this is nice. This is good. And then one day, and they didn't do this very often, but one day they did a full-on, come on down, kneel at the altar call. And my wife got up and went down, and I was shocked. I was like, wait, I thought we were cool, sneak in, sneak out, hear the message, call it good, and that rattled my world. I mean, she was changed. And I thought, okay, now I got to get serious about this. And so somewhere in there, I mean, God just really got a hold of me, and I started reading my Bible, and I just got way serious about it. And here's what's weird. Because I had gone to church as a kid, I think the last time I'd been to church was when I was 12, but for whatever reason in my mind, I must have been a Christian because I went to a church once or something. And so I didn't feel this overwhelming need to take action on my faith, except my life demonstrates that huge action was happening. My wife and I got really serious about our faith. We got really passionate about learning and studying and reading, and I look back on some of the books we were excited about and I cringe. But, it was awesome as young Christians. And so, and somehow later in life, I realized, wait, I became a Christian at that point in my life, and I had to look back on examining the fruit of my life rather than examining a date when something happened. So I really appreciate it. I can kind of pinpoint my faith journey to like a couple of months. Like somewhere in there, I definitely was just given over to following Christ as Lord. And so looking back, you're in seminary, and you're like, how does this all work theologically? But it was really helpful for me. And so it's really easy for me to say, yep, in college and in the military kind of simultaneously, with my wife leading the way, I ended up following my wife as she's following Christ in 1999 and just early into 2000. And so kind of a weird, not super helpful story. Plus, I'd been baptized at a youth camp as like a 12-year-old kid, only because all my friends were doing it. And I really, I don't want to bash on the pastor, but you should have examined, instead of just taking the kids in the line and baptizing them. Because in my mind, I'm like, well, I must be good. I've been baptized. And so I was in seminary processing that and on staff at a church and preaching and doing different things. I wasn't the senior pastor, but when I come to this conviction, I literally preached a sermon and then got baptized, which wrecked our whole church. They were so confused. And then a lot of Christians went out of the, if he's working through this and following Christ. We had a lot of adult baptisms after that because the guy could preach a sermon and then get baptized. It was a weird, weird situation.
Well, in actuality, okay, so it sounds weird to someone like Jonathan and I because we're East Coast guys. So we're entrenched in church for hundreds of years and in liturgy and ritualism and things. And so you and I just recently had a conversation on your podcast about the aspect of people here falling into not so much content as a good thing, but as complacency. Mm-hmm. And so you were telling me there's a difference. So I would say the people in Utah, you guys basically have like a UPG. You're like an unreached people group, right?
Well, technically, yeah. So the International Mission Board says that an unreached people group is a population where 2% or less of the population are Christians, active, faithful believers. And in our context, that's the state of Utah. Although recent surveys say there's a big difference between churched and Christian, because churched here could be LDS, and we don't hold that that's a Christian view in our ministry. And so about 2% statewide. In the area where I'm doing ministry, it's less than that. And then we do ministry in an area that has about 10,000 people, and we know every Christian, and there's about 30 of them. They all attend one church in an area up in Morgan. So it's like that's our unreached people group. And our little church plant ministry is partnering with that church plant ministry in Morgan. And, and the church has never been there. They're like the first evangelical Christian church to ever put a building up in any way, shape, or form. They're leasing a little space in that context. We have a lot of cities in Utah that have never had a Christian church in them ever. And we get to watch cities as they have their first Christian church, their first baptism in a community. So that's the context I'm in. The church hasn't got here. You guys are on the East Coast where you're talking about this post-church culture where everybody went to church with grandma and they own a Bible. In my context, they've never owned a Bible. Some of them have never really heard anything other than, maybe a Mormon view of Jesus or something like that. And we open the Bible and they're reading John for the first time, or they're like, that's the context I live in. And so it's pretty missionary. And a lot of our tactics come more from IMB than like the North American Mission Board. We don't have a lot of church revitalization in our context because some of the oldest churches here were planted in 1950, right. And so it's just a really different context.
So that means that there would be more of a grassroots and a good thing, because you're basically forming a missional DNA from the get-go, like church planting. So would you say that then disciple making is really it has an ability to be more formulated from a grassroots instead of as a class like it is on the East Coast?
Well, so it's cool because we don't have the baggage. We don't have, unless someone's moved here from the East Coast, we don't have people going, hey, well, what about this program or this workbook? Or people have never seen it. It's challenging, though, because we also don't have any cultural background or a large stock of mature Christians to help in discipleship. So ironically, Matt, as you did your project in Reproducible Discipleship, so did I. Yeah. But mine was in a non-Christian context. So how do you start a discipleship program from zero? And so my project really was me coming in, modeling and working with 4 people, 1 woman, 3 men. Then they went and modeled and discipled a really very simple process to a group of about 12 people. And then we measured if that group of 12 would be able to take something further. But none of them had a background in any of this. They'd never seen any of this before. And so, or if they did, it was just because they've read books or heard, other preachers talk about it, or they visited their family members from the South or the East or something. And so there are some churches that are doing some of this. I came from a church on staff, and I was working in discipleship, and we had some traditional Sunday school stuff. But most of that was to not so much appease, but to work with people who moved here. Indigenous people here had no context of it.
What's funny is, to correct you on my project.
Yeah, fire away, man.
So it's funny because we're almost the same, except for I took the strategy one. So since I'm the director of New Breed, I didn't have to have the quantifiable evidence as much as you do. So I did the strategy of what New Breed is already doing, and ours is a reproducible discipleship or disciple making for the expressed interest of church planners reaching new converts. It had, so it had
a similar kind of thing.
Yeah, so it had, but except that you had to take an actual group, a test group, and run through it. My test group was already working. There. It was already there. It was the New Breed church planners, which some are West Coast, some are East Coast, some are even, we got guys in Spain and Wales and, all over. So for us, our test group was bigger, but I was already utilizing things that were working for new breeders, basically.
That's cool.
Yeah.
It is nice though at times not to have the there's some things that are good about having a church culture and a church tradition, very good things. When we travel and we engage with other churches and other places, I kind of long for, wow, you guys do this dinner thing on Wednesday and you have this service and people are doing, there's just certain things I like. But at the same time, I love not having the bad habits or the baggage that comes with that. No one's pressing in what we're doing. They're like, well, why aren't we doing this program that I did in the 80s? I'm like, wait, nobody even brings any of that up. In fact, I live in a context where you say something like, hey, this book's by Howard Hendricks, and they go, who's that guy? And this is John Piper, who's that guy? And this is Matt Chandler, who's that guy? And it's just, like nobody knows anything of Christianity. And so,
and you know what's crazy? Well, I don't want to say crazy. What's blows my mind with that is I was just in Colorado. You jump over to Colorado and it's there.
Oh, and you must have been in Colorado Springs, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Colorado Springs is like this super weird bubble mecca and I don't know how that happened. When I was in the military, I was at Fort Carson. I'm like, what is going on in this town? Like, I don't know if it's just because all the headquarters stuff there, but it's just super weird bubble. And then there's another weird bubble like that in Twin Falls, Idaho. That's just like, man, and then Boise's kind of having a little explosion of the non-denominational church thing going on. So we're seeing things happen, which is super cool.
I love how I just said Colorado, and he was like, "Oh, you're in Colorado Springs."
Well, if you said it was not like what I'm describing, I'm like, there's only one place in Colorado. Everywhere else is like Rocky Mountain High and who knows what else. It's cuckoo town. So, but Colorado Springs is a little evangelical Mecca, right? Mm-hmm. Closest thing, we have to some of that. So if we want to go to Christian concerts, it's like Boise or Colorado Springs. It's because most of the Christians just fly on over or drive on through. So,
well, I do think, like you said, you don't have the baggage, or, the extra weight from that. Because, Matt and I have talked about it here. There's this common culture within the church here on the East Coast is where everyone throws around is there's complacency, and people have relegated their faith and their Christianity and their mission mind to the 3-foot space on the front, back, left, and right of them within their pew. And that's it. Like, you put on your church clothes Sunday, and then that's it.
So I would have never believed you had I had done a Skype session with a church about some tools we use, 15-second story, ways of sharing, praying with people outside. And they're like, wait, this was said. Wait, you do evangelism outside your church? I just about wanted to roll over and die. I'm like, what is happening? What are you talking about? Are you kidding me? I mean,
you know what? It's sad that we're laughing, though. And the only reason we're laughing is because sometimes, like, satire has a lot of truth, and this isn't satire.
Yeah.
Like, the truth of the fact,
scary.
Yeah, the fact of the matter is, like, they will look at me like so I just now came about a half hour ago, came before we were meeting, and I was sitting with a bunch of pastors, and I meet with them sometimes on Wednesdays, and we get together, and like, pastors always have that inside kind of deal that's going on, but we talk about the reality of people not engaging in their faith in a real way and being okay with it. Like, I understand that you have innovators, early adopters, and late adopters, but it seems where we are, there is foremost, like, almost all of them are either late adopters or they're just not even engaging in a lot. You may have a select few, but I mean, I've been here for 5.5 years, and I have the roughest time sometimes getting people engaged into life group. They just don't understand. Like, and they'll still ask a question like, "When are we going to have, like, Wednesday night study?" Wow.
Well, Dr. Jeff Wertz has a term for that in his book, The Painful Side of Leadership. He identifies those individuals as laggers. Like, he's like, you got early adopters, like, they're they're like almost intentionally dragging behind. They might not, I mean, maybe it's a little unintentional, but they're lagging behind, not even slow. They're way back there. And I'm like, man, that's helpful. I
also think a lot of people fall victim to the procrastination by education. Like, I'm not going to do, I'm just going to read and think and do, but I'm not going to, if I end this book or learn something, then I have to go do. So I'm going to sit back and learn something else and then relegate myself to processes that I don't enact.
Well, that was a big aspect of what I was doing when I was studying, and I found that it seemed like the most successful things had an instant follow-up action rep. What are you going to do with this truth, like, right now? What is the application now? And let's talk about it next week and see how it goes. One of the questions we incorporated in our discipleship was, how are your disciples doing in their ministry to others? And people are like, wait, I don't have disciples. I'm like, well, I'm going to ask you that again next week. So
go find one.
That's right.
Yeah, it's right. I mean, I think you're right. I just want to keep filling my head for the sake of not having to do something. Although in our context, two things happen. When you have this non-Christian context, you have people that love that. They want to fill their head, but they kind of want to huddle up because you got to be pretty hardcore to live the Christian faith here openly and well, because you're such a minority that people are just confused by you. I mean, you could be the only Christian in your giant workplace. You could be the only Christian in your entire neighborhood. You could be the only Christian, in your. I had whole college classes, where there was like 100+ people, and I knew there's no Christians in here. Or if there are, they're in total hiding because it's just awkward. And so it wasn't so much here about apathy; it's about fear if they're not doing something, or they love huddling up, but they don't want to kind of out that. You just really, I tell the people that are going to church with us, we've had some people that have moved. So we're indigenous, and we planted indigenously just in a different part of the valley with kind of let's just make disciples and then gather them into the church and see what happens. And we've had some folks that we've made disciples, or maybe they've been associated with us in some capacity from the other church. They end up, rather than hiving off this big old group and just putting sort of a new group of Christians here, we don't have that luxury in our context. They've moved into this community and they lived in, I thought, man, in this context, opposed to any other church plant I can imagine, even in our part of the community, it's even more so because they live in a little rougher part of Salt Lake. We call it Samaria because the rest of Salt Lake doesn't want to have anything to do with it. A lot of refugees and a lot of different culture here and a lot of poverty. So the Christians won't even come through here. It's Samaria, right? And so you got to be hardcore. It's not just a cool, hip, trendy thing to go along with the new church plant. It's already hard enough to be a Christian in an established church in Utah, and now you're going to add this church plant thing, which is even more different, more weird. You got to haul everything in and out of a trailer. Luckily, we finally got into a building so we could stop doing that, but it's next to the sewer treatment plant, You got to be hardcore to be in church planting in a place like this. And so I say that just to commend all the people that are a part of our plant, and then all the people that are coming out and doing this in Salt Lake. So all of that to say, apathy is probably a lesser problem, I would hope. It still happens, but I appreciate.
I think I've heard it where they've been asked. So, do you think Christianity has it worse in places of persecution or in America? And I said, quite honestly, America. Because complacency just kills it. Persecution thrives it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so we did the Salty Believer Unscripted Podcast. We've been doing that for about 6 years now, and all kinds of different series. The website to find it is saltybeliever.com. We interviewed Nick Ripken. We did 2 interviews with him, and it was one of the most convicting things because he had pointed out, everyone's like, oh, what's going to happen? And is America going to have all this persecution? He talks about it in one of his books. Is America going to have all this persecution? And he said, why? I think his line is, why would Satan, I don't know how he worded it, light us up, fire us up, or persecute us, or do something when we're already asleep? Like you're almost better off with persecution because it kind of weeds out some of those issues, And so it was convicting to me. I wish I could remember how he said the line, but we're already asleep.
The point makes sense. We're complacent, largely
and you have the problems you guys are talking about, right, in the East, where everybody's apathetic. They're not doing anything, So that's unfortunate. I appreciate what we have here. We had an intern move out from Georgia. She's great. She came out here, and her first issue was like, it's so weird not being around Christians anywhere, being the only Christian in my workplace most of the time. And now she says, what I like about it is that when you do run into Christians, there's generally a greater level of authenticity among those Christians than what she was accustomed to from her Christian college, from her neighbors, from her church, the places where she was at in Georgia. And not to bag on the people in Georgia, but, if you're in Utah and there are no Christians around you and they think you're a weirdo and you're going to live your faith publicly, you got to be serious about it. So she just says, I really appreciate that when I run into Christians, they take the Bible seriously, they live this seriously, or they're in hiding and they haven't quite grown into this courage to live in a way that the Bible would.
Not that there's not a hunger anywhere else, but that tells me that there's just a genuine hunger, a hunger to learn and a hunger to experience when you're in that environment.
Well, it's the famine. It's the famine. It's the famine of the word.
All those people still exist where you guys are at, and in Georgia.
Right.
Mm-hmm. But the problem is you also have all these other people that are there for the volleyball team, and they're for the whatever, and they're because they're a real estate agent and they hope they can find more clients, and they're because that's just what they've always done. And so we've just weeded all that out. So you still have those same people, probably 2%. I don't know. You still have some percentage. I don't live there, so I can't suggest what it is. But you have, whenever I travel to those places, you have all the peripheral stuff. Mm-hmm. That our context weeds out. And so I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for it in me. It's hard for me to be apathetic because it's obvious. And so
right. Well, we're dealing with the numbers like 12, the whole 12% attend church on any given Sunday, or 20% of North Americans, only 20% engage discipleship at any point, which is crazy. So, 12% and 20%, and so it's like you have 12% that are engaging church on any given Sunday, and of those 12, only 20% of that are being discipled in any way, shape, or form. And so, we just see it's less than lackluster. And now you can see why someone like me, who's driven apostolically, so to speak, gets into church planting stuff. because that, like, it just fires me up. Like, I need that firing and to be discipling in other guys. So for me, like, I think if I were to just be, like, solely be a pastor, I'd probably be bored to death. Like, I have to do these other things to engage it, not only in that, but I'm engaging people in the marketplace. Everywhere I see somebody, whether it's in the gym or wherever it is, I have to be talking about it. But I think it's what when we were talking with our last interview when we had with Doc Reed, it's just one of those things that, we were talking with him, that to engage your faith is a reality, having these gospel conversations with people, and making sure that if you really love Jesus, that's the reason why you have those conversations, not because you have to, but because you love him. So it's different.
Well, you said it, and I love the point you made, that whatever large debt you have, a home, a car, and you said if your mortgage lender came to you tomorrow and said, hey, I've just wiped out your mortgage, you would jump up and
lose your
run
ever-loving mind
and tell everyone you knew that, hey, my mortgage lender just wiped away my debt. Right. All right, well, what debt have each and every one of us sitting here talking had wiped away? Then go tell someone about it.
Yeah. I'll tell you, it's well, so we've been talking, and I stole this from everything we do. We've stole from somewhere. I have no good ideas. I just find all the other good ideas and steal them. And so, it helps. You can figure out if it works before you try it. I was talking to this guy, I can't remember where, and we sort of adopted something. I think he might be in Colorado, actually, now that I think about it. But we said, look, there's really three people you talk to with the gospel. Yourself. You get good about talking to yourself. Can you even communicate into your own soul and into your own mind what the gospel is saying into your own situation? Can you even do that? And then you talk with other Christians about the gospel, because the gospel still has to be changing us every day. And can you help your fellow brothers and sisters with articulating the gospel into other people every day that are Christians, right? Yeah. And then, and it's just, it's discipleship. And then, so like, if you can't really help yourself with the gospel at all, how do you expect to help your brothers and sisters? You cannot preach it to yourself. You're not going to preach it to your brothers and sisters. But here's where we're finding in our church at Redeeming Life, it's been really helpful. We've been really pressing, like, preach the gospel to each other, because if you can't preach it to each other, if you cannot communicate the gospel to people who are already in the church, on the same team, in the family, how do you ever expect to tell somebody else about it? So if you can't walk in and say, hey, my mortgage lender wiped my debt clean with your friend, how are you going to tell strangers? I mean, it's just so we've been working on those conversations a lot, because what I'm finding is a lot of people can't preach the gospel even to themselves. They don't have a habit of that. And then they struggle to talk with each other about it. And so we've been practicing that a lot. And that seems to be helping as we tell everybody else about it, because then you notice, do you realize the debt that's been paid? Do you realize this? Do you realize how that speaks to that? It's been helpful. And so that's one of the things that we've found that I don't know, might be helpful in your context of apathy too. But if we can't do that, then what are we doing? And so that's been really helpful, because now they
without a sense of urgency, if you take out the sense of urgency, then I think we take out a lot of the depth of what grace really applies to. Yeah.
So that's the one advantage I think that we tend to have where we're at. You're looking around your workplace at everybody you know, and if it's 2%, or we're like 1.8 or whatever we're at. If you can say, look, I work with 100 people and I'm one of the Christians, and 0.8 of somebody else here might be a Christian statistically, everybody you look at is lost. So we have the advantage most of the time. People do feel that sense of brokenness with their family members or coworkers or friends, their neighbors. And so I think that urgency might be part of the issue you guys maybe don't feel, because everybody might even be claiming, hey, I'm a Christian, I go to church, whatever. It's a little harder to lose that in a context where you just don't have, if you look at like the various statistics I talked to, Peyton Jones talks about the West some, and many guys, Vance Pittman's talking about it. There's a lot of people starting to talk about it, but you start looking at the numbers, and when those of us who, I'm indigenous to this area, and when I go to a city and it's like 12% Christian, it feels bonkers to me, and so that's what's going on in the West. I think that urgency with the church planting and the missional stuff is really starting to kick up more, I would hope, in a lot of the context out here. I hope that could be infectious. The South and the East have brought resources and funds and people this way. And I hope that we can return the favor by bringing urgency and maybe methods that have worked and passion back to the East and to the South. I don't know. We'll see what happens. But if not, man, it's not going to be pretty.
So, go for it. I did.
That's all,
for a minute.
Yeah,
the door rattled.
Yeah, that's all cool. So, So how are we on time, by the way?
We're doing good. We've done. It should be by my clock. It should be 1 o'clock.
Oh, that's all cool.
Yeah.
So within the aspect of
I gotta interrupt you. It's great being on this end. I'm usually on the end with Jonathan, like watching the time, doing the questions with our podcast. So I'm like, this is great.
Yeah,
man. And
I get so into it sometimes that I forget where time is. I just want to keep going with a lot of guys, and have the conversation, and then all of a sudden, like I look down and it's like, oh, time to wrap it up, man.
Well, like I said earlier, it used to be that I was in Atlanta, Matt was here, and guests were all over. So like coming together and getting all the pieces together was different. This right here is the third episode where we've been able to record together, and it brings a nice, unique aspect, and I get more into it this way too.
Yeah.
So
that's good.
So do us a favor then, man, because you have the passion that we're sort of the people that have the same. But speak to the audience about those who maybe have a passion and want to serve, but don't really know how to follow that out, don't really know what it looks like. What would your advice be for them to, because you said like you started out and you following this path and it led you to, or I should say really, the Holy Spirit was leading you the whole time. But the aspect is you were already examining a path. So what would you say to someone who thinks they're feeling something and they're examining that path? What would be some advice that you may give to that person?
I don't want to apologize for how simple this is, but do something. Just start doing something. Read the word, say, what is this moving me to do? What is God speaking to me? And then do something, because it's a lot easier I think the term is to steer apart. It's hard to steer a parked car, maybe. You start moving. I'm a military guy, so just fire. So the example, most people are not snipers in the military. Most people have lots and lots of rounds, thousands of them. So if you're in an aircraft, say a Black Hawk, and you're so I was definitely not a chaplain, but you're firing rounds and it's a machine gun. Okay, so you have a tracer and you can see where the bullets are going with the tracers, but you don't see where you're really hitting until you see tracers. So you can't even start until you pull the trigger. And then you're adjusting fire. And a lot of people are hesitant to pull the trigger because they might do something not quite right. They might miss the mark. Do something. Get in that community with you. Continue to read and let God adjust fire and improve what you're doing. And so when guys sit stalled out and hesitant and afraid, I think God's leading me to share the gospel with my coworker. I always just tell them, yeah, do it. What if I mess up? No, just do it. Yeah. I mean, God's sovereign in this. Like, adjust fire as you go. Keep learning. Keep getting better. But if you don't start, you're never going to be able to make any adjustments. And that's exactly what we see, I think, in all the disciples when they're walking with Jesus. Like, hey, do this. What? Hey, how about that? Nope. Hey, no, hold on. Jesus is always correcting them. And then even in the book of Acts, we see them going and doing stuff, but there's like things are changing as they're going, and you just see them growing. I don't think you grow if you just sit like a bump on a log, So do something. Sounds oversimplified, but I think that's what's holding up a lot of people.
I think that fits really well. I used to use that same mode of training with guys that I managed back when I was still in my career. I would train these guys and lead them and just would tell them, I'm not going to do it for you. Go and do something. You're going to make a mistake, but that's fine. We'll learn from it, lift you up, build you up, go, but you're not going to learn, you're not going to grow, and you're not going to become more confident unless you go and do. And so right. I think, that carries over. Like I said, I taught that to the guys that I managed in my career, and that bleeds over into every aspect, even of our faith. Go, witness to somebody. You're never going to do it, and you're not going to know what's right or wrong, or the right way or the wrong way, unless you do it. And from the first time to the last time, you'll get better and more confident every time.
I think when we forget the end of the Great Commission in Matthew 28, I'm with you till the end of the age.
In the beginning.
Yeah, well, he says, And lo, I'm with you to the end of the age, right?
Yeah, so and I've always called the Great Commission the Great Sandwich, because he starts it by saying, I have all authority on heaven and earth, therefore.
Yeah.
So the whole reason, the whole mandate is based upon the fact that he has ultimate authority over every living cosmic thing, and then he's going to be with us. So we have just the stuff in between.
So what are you worried about, right? I mean, that's the point. Like, I mean, we constantly, we got a guy that we work with here, and he's always like, it's like go with your dad to work day.
Yeah, every day.
What, you think you're doing this on your own? No, you're tagging along with what God's doing, right? Like, so what are you worried about? I'm like, that's really helpful. I mean, do something and trust God's there. And
I read an article for Church Planter magazine. I think, it had to have been now like 3 years ago or so, maybe even 4. But I did it on when I was church planting, and the title was "When Failing is Not Failure." And I think a lot of times we believe that like failing is failure, but failing is not failure. Failing is learning. Failure is when you fail, when you stop learning, and when you just quit.
Throw your hands up in there.
You stall out. I mean, you're just done.
Right.
And I think that's really probably the biggest problem that I think the American church is facing today. It's, we just notice when we can start seeing people move, it's amazing what's going to, then God, you start seeing God moving. Now, God was moving long before they moved.
That's right.
But you see God moving when people start moving. I mean, things start happening. And then it's so far out of what you could have planned usually. Like, wow, it's a good thing we actually did something, because then God showed us what was really going to happen. Let's adjust fire and get on board with that,
Right. As far as I read in the biblical and the meta narrative of the Bible, I never see a spot where the guys are like, that basically happened like we planned it.
Yeah, exactly.
Never happens.
Exactly.
I mean, Joshua's first command, he goes back to his generals. He's like, all right, guys, gather up. Guess what we're going to do? Like, how are we going to take the city? All right, we're going to walk around it.
Right.
And they're like, really? He's the commander? Like, all right, we need to re-elect somebody. I mean, like all the things that happen. I think it was Francis Chan who once said, I think it may be misquoting it, but it was Francis Chan or someone else, but they said, if your name was in the Bible and your story was in there, and if you read it, would you say he took it pretty safe?
I think, no. I that was at Liberty when he spoke at the.
I think so.
He probably says that like 100 times, but then the other thing he said is it's on the heels of he was telling somebody he was going to go to China and share, or go to Asian nations, but he's going to go to China and share the gospel. And someone's like, whoa, that's so radical and so amazing. And he's like, a Chinese guy's going to go to China and share the gospel? I don't think that'd make it in the book of Acts. Like, are you kidding? That's not amazing. And then he said that. Yeah, then he goes into that line of, well, what's it going to look like? And, you're playing it safe, or are you doing something that's going to make it in the book of Acts, or funny to me. I mean, but helpful, very helpful.
Yeah, I think what gets us is, and you've said it, Alan Briggs has said it in different ways, we as a culture like to be the best at everything, and we want all of it right now, and so we lack patience. And so that bleeds over into our faith, and when it comes to discipling someone or witnessing to someone, we think that I've got to be the best at it. I'm not on the level as my pastor, or I'm not on the level of this person, so I'm not going to go and do it because I can't be the best at it. And so it's a confidence. A lot of it's a confidence thing. I mean, you realize you're not going to be the best of it. Whoever might quote unquote be the best of something here still isn't the best. We're all still broken. We're all still people. We all still have a voice to use. Whether you're one day old believer, I've been pastoring a church for 20 years, theologian, we're all intrinsically the same in God's eyes. Just use your voice. He gave it to you.
We look at guys like Alvin Reed as evangelism athletes, Olympians, right? Yeah. We go, wow, that's so amazing. Well, no athlete or Olympian started like that. I mean, jump out of the womb and you're like the best at whatever. That just doesn't happen. And so what we don't have with, well, great athletes, but also great evangelists, is we don't get to see all the years when they weren't great. And so we forget that that's the process, and if you could just rewind that and look and go, oh my, wow, he did not just say that or do that. Wow, that guy doesn't know what he's doing, to some of the best evangelists. And, I think we just make a lot of assumptions of people that hurt us.
Mm-hmm. So I'll throw that out there. So something similar. I just watched I read a quick snippet it was about success and how people put hard work in, and people like to say that, Chris Rock is real funny, and they think that he's just naturally a funny guy, but they're like, what you don't know about him is that all the work that he puts in, like 2 years before he's going to go on a tour, he writes this script and he goes into all of these off-street, offbeat comedy clubs and reads all of these horrendously terrible, bad, miserable jokes to hone it all the way down into like an hour-long bit. So it doesn't matter who you are. People that we perceive to be great at everything, they are good at their craft, but they worked at it.
Yeah, well,
and
so
we have to do the same.
I'll share one that's very similar. So I was a gateway for my doctoral work, and I had a seminar on writing and teaching and things. And Dr. Orge has written a bunch of books. Jim Wilson, like a bunch of these people who've written books are sitting in the room and they're doing this lecture, and I think it's the same with many, but Dr. Orge says, I have the wonderful advantage of having this whole faculty of people and a lot of other friends that are just regular people, and he creates a committee of the very best people that he will be the most embarrassed if he wrote something bad to show them. Like, this would be so embarrassing if I wrote something wrong. He gives it to them first in the small little group and says, look, your job is to make sure that I'm not embarrassed in front of the whole country. I'd rather just be embarrassed in front of you. And he starts telling these stories. I'm like, wow, you forget that people don't just write a book. There's this whole process of work and how much. And then Jim Wilson's like, my favorite editor is the delete key. When I wrote this book, I actually wrote 9 books and they were all real bad and I whittled it down. And you just forget that when you watch what's happening. Someone told me, I don't know how true this is. Someone told me that even like Matt Chandler went back and they took a lot of his first few years of preaching off the website because some of it didn't have good teaching and there was just issues there. And you just forget that this is the reality of any craft that you're involved in. Nobody just is magically good at anything unless your craft is to be lazy and cry and have someone feed you. No one else is born with what they are good at. Yeah,
early Augustine and late Augustine are two different things, man.
Right.
Different theologies even.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and you have to wonder. It's funny, I had one professor who said when he went to get his Hebrew tattoo, he went to the Hebrew scholar and said, make sure I got this right.
Yeah. Don't put the wrong stuff on my body forever.
That's right. All right. Well, hey, man, before we sign off, we always ask our wretched and wrecked question, which is, we're the wretched before we come to Christ. And of course, the Holy Spirit wrecks us and transforms us through the gospel of grace in Christ. And so can you share with someone, maybe just it doesn't have to be your salvation, you already shared that, but a wrecked moment where the Holy Spirit worked in and through your life?
I've got to be honest. You sent, I know that's what you guys do, and I thought, man, I feel like I have a wrecked moment like every other week.
That's sweet.
But I'm like, oh, whoops, oh, wow. But I think the big wrecking in my life for me came. I was a soldier. It was first year of the war in Iraq. I was out on the Syrian border. Before that, I was going to be a rich lawyer, and I was really steeped in I'm going to serve my country. I'm going to serve my fellow man through political processes, whatever. I just really wanted to make a huge contribution, and at the same time, I also wanted to be rich. And I was a Christian, but I'm sitting out on the border, and I just feel like I had this overwhelming sense of you're about to get wrecked. And it took a long time to come out of the wreckage, but God just really showed me, man, you're serving this thing, but you need to serve the kingdom. And it's going to look a lot different than you ever planned. So I take my night vision goggles off, and which is really stupid, and I'm just looking at the star field in Syria, and you might as well be on the ocean because you're in the western desert. We're looking into the Syrian border, but you can't see anything when there's a lull in the fighting, and it's just this spectacular thing. And I realized I'm serving my government, and I think I'm doing a good thing, but it pales in comparison to the King of Kings. And so there I am, trying to get through a deployment, and the whole time just going, this is good, but it's really not even close to what God has for a Christian to serve the King, and I got to serve like that. And so I didn't re-enlist. It just changed my life. It changed the entire trajectory of what I was doing, because the pinnacle of service for the soldier is, being all you can be and serving your country. And there's just this picture of service. And when I was so wrecked by the reality that I was doing something that everybody was thanking me for, and I got home, I got lots of ribbons and got home, and everybody's like, thank you for your service. Thank you for your service. Nobody looks at me as a pastor and goes, thank you for your service. In the same way they did when I was a soldier and coming out. Or if I tell them I was a veteran, they go, wow, thank you for your service. Well, you're a combat veteran. I'm thinking, you don't even get it. I'm serving a way bigger thing. But if the wrecking was actually in the middle of all that, just have something bigger for you. And you need to get over yourself and follow, because it made no sense to me and it didn't look good. Like, I'm going to do what? I'm going to plant the church in Utah, and that's going to be somehow more significant than we're trying to capture Saddam Hussein and we're fighting a war and we're serving our country. And now looking back, church planting is way harder than that ever was. And that was hard. It's way more significant. The eternal significance is it's like night and day. But that was the moment for me when the Holy Spirit just said,
wow. How applicable though that God would speak to a soldier with night vision to say, like, you're going to come serve me on my battlefield in the spiritual warfare, and without having his vision, you can't see anything either. Like, wow, that's just like so applicable, like in how he speaks to us in our context. And sometimes it just goes over our head to not really gather, what we're really up against. I mean, you are, a front line, especially church planting. I mean, it's front lines ministry, man. You're dealing with supernatural things that you can't see. They come up against your family. They come up against, through the back door, the side door, and try to really slip you up in so many ways that, if you don't have the soldier mentality of understanding that you're enlisted in that, it can be really difficult. But you know what? I'm thankful to call you brother, and I know that for the rest of eternity, you and I get to know each other. We get to lose our ever-loving minds when we see Christ and just be like, dude, there he is, right? And just go
You know what's going to happen, though? This is what's going to happen. I'm going to get to see you worshiping Jesus, but you're not going to get to see me worshiping Jesus, because you're going to have like a much further front row seat than I'm going to have. So I'm like, he's up there and he's worshiping Jesus. Hey, I'm glad we're all here, though.
Oh my goodness, no, because in his parable he would be like, hey, Brian's way too far back. Come on.
I see what you did there.
There you go, man. All right, Jonathan.
All right, man. It was a pleasure getting to chit chat with you, and we all got to correct one another.
All right, we need to have him back on, man.
Yeah, we definitely got to get you back on. These are fun. This was a lot of fun, so we'll have to stay in. We'll have to stay in touch. So, thank you so much for coming on. Had a great conversation. I think this will resonate really well with our audience. So it's a lot of just real talk. So
thanks for having me.
Before we let you go, just take a second and let everyone know how they can keep up with everything you have going on planning wise and connect if that's a possibility.
Well, if there's anybody, in the Salt Lake area, we're at Redeeming Life Church. The website there is redeeminglifeutah.org. We'd love to have you plug in and connect there. We do live streaming things, now with our service, with other things. We do lots of stuff. I'm at saltybeliever.com with another guy, kind of like what you guys are doing here. And then we podcast at Salty Believer Unscripted, which in like a week from this recording anyway, we've got Matthew on, which will be awesome. So any of those avenues, easy way to get a hold of me there, and we'd love to hear from you, connect with you, and keep plugging away in ministry with anybody who's interested in what we're doing.
All right, man, that's awesome. Hey, Rec Nation, you heard it. Salty Believer Unscripted in iTunes. Give them a like and subscribe, and leave them a good review. Just like with us, iTunes uses those ratings and reviews to propel viewer audience and viewership and visibility. And so for ministry guys like us who are co-laboring, those are crucial to making sure these episodes get out and reach people, because it's not about us, it's about God's kingdom. Again, Bryan, thanks for coming on today. We look forward to having you on again in the future. And for those in the Salt Lake City area, look up Bryan. And if you have any questions for us, you can reach out to us at the letter j31.org/podcast, and you can fill out our questionnaire form. We want to hear from you. This is a year of engagement for us, so fire away questions, we'll answer them. With that being said, until next time, Rec Nation.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of The Wretched and the Wrecked. If you liked what you just heard, please subscribe in iTunes and leave us a positive review. The Wretched and the Wrecked podcast is brought to you by Job 31 Ministries. For more information and to connect with us, please visit us online at www.j31.org.